In the grim darkness of the far future, where humanity's hold over the galaxy is constantly threatened by war, the hive fleets of the Tyranids are a nightmare beyond mortal understanding. These colossal swarms move through the stars, an unending force driven by a hunger that knows no bounds, seeking to devour all biomass they encounter. They are the ultimate predators, existing solely to consume and evolve, absorbing the genetic material of countless species and refining their terrifying efficiency with each new conquest. Unlike other xenos threats, the Tyranids are not motivated by conquest, greed, or even survival in any relatable sense. Their singular goal is to consume, to reduce every world, moon, and ecosystem to bare, lifeless rock. With no individual ambition, culture, or politics, the Tyranids embody a vast, incomprehensible intellect, the hive mind, a gestalt consciousness controlling every member of their swarm, from the smallest spore to the largest bio-titan. Through the hive mind, the Tyranid swarm moves as one, an organism both singular and infinite, perfectly coordinated, adaptable, and remorseless. When a Tyranid hive fleet is sighted, its presence is often heralded by the disturbing arrival of a shadow in the warp, a psychic effect that blocks communication, confuses navigation, and isolates entire sectors from the wider Imperium. This suffocating psychic veil signals the coming of an unstoppable force that few civilizations can withstand. Every hive fleet operates like an independent army, a single-minded entity designed to strip entire star systems of life. The initial sightings of Tyranid bioforms were dismissed by the Imperium as bizarre mutations or isolated xenos infestations. But as reports grew of swarms too vast to be contained, too coordinated to be natural, the truth became undeniable. An alien threat of unprecedented scale had breached the galaxy's borders. From the fringes of known space, this relentless tide poured forth, decimating everything in its path and forcing humanity to confront the limits of its own strength and resilience. The Tyranids first emerged in recorded Imperial history through Hive Fleet Behemoth, a force of such ferocity and magnitude that even the mighty Ultramarines chapter of the Space Marines barely survived its onslaught. Worlds across the galaxy have since fallen to successive fleets, each hive more advanced, more evolved, and even more ruthless than the last. And yet, for all the knowledge and resources expended in battling them, the true extent of the Tyranid menace remains shrouded in mystery. New hive fleets continue to appear, each one potentially the tip of an even larger, unimaginable horde lurking beyond the galactic void. Against this backdrop of chaos and desperation, Imperial forces scramble to formulate effective defenses, knowing that victory against the Tyranids is temporary at best. As each hive fleet grows more intelligent and adaptable, entire sectors of the galaxy are reduced to ruins and ash. The arrival of another hive fleet heralds a new chapter of unrelenting terror, a confrontation between humanity and a devouring force as old as the universe itself. To the Imperium, these battles are do-or-die struggles, mere holding actions against a species that exists to render the galaxy empty. Thus begins another chapter in the grim chronicles of the 41st millennium. As Imperial forces prepare for another inevitable encounter with a Tyranid hive fleet, they must brace themselves for a battle not only for survival, but for the very right to exist in a universe that teems with forces bent on their annihilation. The galaxy trembles at the mere mention of the Tyranid hive fleets, each one a harbinger of annihilation. But even within these vast forces of consuming horror, specific factions and individuals stand as central figures, shaping the deadly symphony of invasion and resistance. The hive mind looms as the dominant intelligence, a vast alien consciousness driving its endless armies toward galactic conquest, influencing every movement and decision in the swarm. Yet, within its seemingly unified organism, different hive fleets possess distinct strategies, strengths, and goals, as if each fleet embodies a unique persona in service to the hive mind's broader purpose. At the heart of this conflict lies the hive mind itself, an entity beyond comprehension. This Gestalt consciousness is both the controller and the soul of the Tyranid swarm, existing across trillions of individual minds, yet inseparable from any one bioform. The hive mind exerts total control, a level of psychic mastery so profound that individual Tyranid creatures are mere limbs and organs in its omnipresent body. No Tyranid operates independently, yet they function with terrifying synchronicity, as if guided by one supreme directive. The hive mind perceives itself as an apex predator, driven by an insatiable hunger and a relentless, cold-blooded pursuit of perfect evolution. In the service of this consciousness are the major hive fleets, Leviathan, Kraken, Behemoth, and others, each more devastating and evolved than the last. Hive Fleet Leviathan, one of the largest and most feared, is infamous for its unorthodox strategies, often attacking in unpredictable patterns that defy the rigid tactics of the Imperium's defensive lines. Leviathan's vanguard organisms are known for their ability to burrow deep into enemy strongholds, emerging where defenses are weakest and sowing chaos before the main swarm descends. Kraken, on the other hand, moves with deadly grace, attacking in multiple converging tendrils that spread across entire sectors. Kraken's distinct tactic of coordinated multi-front attacks overwhelms defenders and leaves entire planets stripped clean before any counteroffensive can be organized. Each fleet's strategy is a testament to the hive mind's ability to learn and adapt, evolving new approaches to counter every defense it encounters. Within these fleets, specific Tyranid bioforms play crucial roles in executing the hive mind's strategies. The synapse creatures are the hive mind's most critical assets, serving as conduits for its psychic command. Among them, Tyranid warriors are adaptable and cunning leaders, coordinating lesser organisms with precise control and operating as a psychic relay for the hive mind. Larger synapse creatures like the tyrants and tervigons provide both the brute force and tactical oversight needed in battle, ensuring that the swarm operates with ruthless efficiency. These elite Tyranid bioforms embody a terrifying balance of strength, resilience, and intelligence, directing their lesser kin with chilling competence. Yet the true face of the hive fleets lies in their monstrous bio-titans and titanic beasts. These creatures represent the epitome of Tyranid evolution, towering bioweapons that dwarf even the mightiest Imperial war machines. The Hierophant Bio-Titans and the dreaded Harridans lead the charge of Hive Fleet Leviathan, unleashing devastation on a scale that obliterates entire regiments with ease. Where these titans go, ruin follows, as they clear paths for the hordes of lesser Tyranid organisms that surge behind them. The Swarm Lord, an ancient and unique bioform, stands as a symbol of the hive mind's undying will to evolve. Created only in the most crucial battles, this creature wields both strategic genius and martial prowess, able to anticipate and counter even the most unpredictable tactics deployed by its foes. On the other side of the conflict, humanity's finest fight desperately to protect the galaxy from the Tyranid menace. The Adeptus Astartes, the Emperor's genetically engineered warriors, are the Imperium's first line of defense against the swarms. Chapters like the Ultramarines, who first encountered the might of Hive Fleet Behemoth, and the Blood Angels, who faced the brutal onslaught of Hive Fleet Leviathan, are legends among the defenders of humanity. These Space Marines bring unmatched strength, tactical acumen, and resilience to their battles with the Tyranids. Yet even their power is stretched to its limits in these engagements. Their role is not merely to kill, but to hold the line, to stand as a bulwark against the devouring tide. Alongside the Space Marines stand the Imperial Guard, the vast armies of the Imperium who meet the Tyranids with sheer numbers and determination. Entire regiments are deployed to stem the tide, often at a brutal cost. The Cadian Shock Troops, the Valhallan Ice Warriors, and the Katakin Jungle Fighters all bring unique combat skills to the struggle, adapting their tactics and weaponry to face the alien threat. These human soldiers are the embodiment of Imperial grit, sacrificing their lives to buy precious time and protect countless worlds. In the face of the Hive Fleets, they know that their victory may only be a temporary reprieve, but they fight regardless, armed with flamers, laser guns, and undying courage. A special mention belongs to the Inquisition and its Ordo Xenos, the arm of Imperial authority dedicated to confronting the Xenos threat. These shadowy operatives wield authority to mobilize any force they deem necessary and deploy elite kill teams like the Death Watch, a select group of space marines specializing in Xenos combat. Drawing warriors from various space marine chapters, the Death Watch adapt their methods to target the Tyranids' weaknesses, bringing advanced weaponry and specialized tactics to the fight. Inquisitors are also known to scour ancient data vaults and alien technologies, seeking any advantage that can turn the tide against the Hive Fleets. Lastly, the Adeptus Mechanicus, with their esoteric knowledge and experimental weaponry, play a vital role in humanity's struggle. Tech priests and their Skitarii legions work tirelessly to develop countermeasures and combat constructs that can withstand the Tyranid onslaught. Their colossal war engines, the Imperial Knights, stride across battlefields, delivering devastating firepower against the bio-titans of the Hive Fleets. The Mechanicus are both the Imperium's armory and its intellectual vanguard, unlocking lost technologies and fabricating weapons powerful enough to contend with the Tyranids' monstrous bioforms. Together, these factions represent the Imperium's last line of defense, each one a crucial part of the desperate effort to stop the Tyranid advance. For all their combined might, however, the defenders of humanity know that they are up against a foe that grows stronger with each battle, adapting to every strategy, overcoming every obstacle, and consuming all in its path. As the Hive Fleets gather strength, these forces brace themselves for battles that will test the very limits of their resilience and resolve. The stakes are no less than the survival of the galaxy itself. The galaxy's turbulent history is marred by countless wars and xenos incursions, but the emergence of the Tyranid Hive Fleets stands apart as a threat of incomprehensible scale and intensity. The Tyranids' appearance was neither sudden nor expected. Instead, it was a slow, creeping realization that humanity was facing a new kind of danger. At first, the Imperium encountered scattered reports of strange bioorganic entities and unusual incidents of entire ecosystems vanishing. Imperial authorities dismissed these as isolated cases, local disturbances, or even as peculiar xenos infestations on remote worlds. Yet, with every new encounter, the magnitude of the threat grew clearer. Early encounters with Tyranid bioforms gave rise to alarm, but were swiftly dealt with by Imperial forces, who were yet to grasp the true extent of the danger. The Tyranids seemed, at first, to be just another exotic xenos breed, a challenge for certain, but nothing that would demand the Imperium's full attention. Small splinter fleets that were detected and eradicated failed to reveal the full scale of what lay beyond the galactic rim. Scholars and strategists were hesitant to connect these encounters, viewing them as sporadic and unrelated incidents that did not warrant a significant shift in the Imperium's defenses. The first major sign of the Tyranids' broader threat came with the arrival of Hive Fleet Behemoth, a monstrous swarm that descended upon the eastern fringes of the Imperium with catastrophic force. This was not an isolated attack, but a coordinated, relentless assault on multiple worlds. The defenders quickly realized that their adversaries were unlike anything they had ever encountered. The Tyranids did not fight for territory, resources, or any discernible goal. Instead, they operated with a horrifying simplicity, complete consumption of all life. The Tyranids used their bioforms in waves, each adapting to the defenses they faced. As the Hive Fleet tore through the star systems, it became brutally evident that the Tyranids would stop at nothing. The assault of Hive Fleet Behemoth forced the Imperium to take notice, and for the first time, humanity's defenders saw the coordinated and destructive capabilities of the Tyranids in their true light. High Command scrambled to analyze reports from the embattled planets, seeking any kind of pattern or weak point in the Tyranid strategies. Tactical archives and records from all branches of the Imperium were combed for information, but the Tyranid tactics defied typical military analysis. Each battle exposed a new kind of bioform or evolved weaponry specifically designed to overcome the defenses it faced. What had once been considered adaptive technology was now recognized as biological evolution, engineered by a higher intelligence that tailored each life form for its specific role in the Hive Fleet strategy. This revelation shifted the Imperium's understanding of the Tyranids from a minor annoyance to an existential threat. It became clear that the Tyranids were an invading species from beyond the galactic void, possessing a singular, ravenous purpose that left nothing behind. The Departamento Munitorum, the Adeptus Mechanicus, and the Inquisition were called to collaborate on immediate solutions, but their usual doctrines of warfare proved inadequate. As Hive Fleet activity increased, more and more resources were diverted toward studying Tyranid biology, weaponry, and patterns in their consumption. The Imperium had to rethink its approach to warfare, developing strategies that prioritized both extermination and containment over traditional military objectives. Yet the realization of the Tyranid threat's gravity did not stop at the Imperium. The Eldar, ancient and secretive, were among the first to recognize the implications of the Tyranid invasion. Their Farseers, masters of foresight and prophecy, had glimpsed in their visions a future overrun by the endless hunger of the Hive Fleets. Unlike other conflicts, which the Eldar might manipulate or evade, the Tyranid menace presented a direct threat to the very existence of their species. For the first time in millennia, the Eldar coordinated with human forces in joint actions against the Tyranids, understanding that cooperation with their longtime enemies was necessary for survival. Despite their disdain for humanity's short-sightedness, the Eldar saw that a galaxy consumed by Tyranids would spell the end for all life, including their own. Even the Orcs, the galaxy's most violent and unpredictable race, reacted to the emergence of the Tyranid Hive Fleets. Known for their joy in battle and instinctive drive to conquer, the Orcs saw the Tyranids as an endless supply of foes to fight. Orc warlords mobilized their war bands in droves, hoping to meet the Tyranids in grand, brutal clashes. To the Orcs, the Tyranids were both a dream and a nightmare, a vast, tireless enemy that provided the ultimate test of their martial might, yet one with no intent to conquer or rule. Orcs found themselves in a conflict that was alien even to them, for while they revel in destruction, the Tyranids' approach to warfare was simply to consume everything, even the very biomass the Orcs relied on to sustain their wars. The Tyranid threat transformed not just the Imperium's military strategies, but the political and philosophical doctrines across the galaxy. High-ranking officials in the Imperium and alien factions alike came to a grim understanding that the Tyranids were not a mere foe to defeat, but a biological imperative that sought to consume the galaxy itself. The Adeptus Mechanicus revised their traditional research mandates to prioritize understanding and countering Tyranid bioforms. Weaponry, which had long been designed for war against other conventional enemies, was modified or discarded in favor of specialized munitions intended to pierce Tyranid carapaces or poison their hive systems. Even the Inquisition, with its fervent suspicion of xenos influence, reluctantly allowed access to xenos technology if it provided even a slim advantage against the Tyranids. These shifts in imperial doctrine were not without consequence. Devotion to the God Emperor, the cornerstone of human faith, was tested by the sheer alien terror of the Tyranids. The ecclesiarchy, once quick to declare xenos as unworthy of divine attention, had to address the implications of this invasive species in its teachings. Preachers and missionaries were deployed to rally faith and morale on worlds under threat, framing the fight against the Tyranids as a holy war. They taught that every Tyranid slain was an offering to the Emperor, a strike against the ultimate heresy that was the alien drive to consume all that humanity held sacred. Despite the fervor, there remained a chilling undercurrent. The realization that the Tyranids could not be bargained with, that even the Emperor's light was powerless to halt their insatiable hunger, settled like a dark shadow over the faithful. The recognition of the Tyranid threat as an apocalyptic force changed the very fabric of the galaxy's military landscape. Alliances that were once unthinkable were forged in the fires of necessity as human, Eldar, and even Orc forces took up arms against a common enemy. Resources were directed not just toward battlefronts, but to the study and prevention of Tyranid spread. Imperial scientists, under the watchful eye of inquisitorial agents, conducted research to isolate potential weak points in Tyranid biology. The Eldar, with their ancient knowledge of genetic manipulation, contributed their insights into Tyranid adaptation, sharing secrets that would otherwise have been kept from human understanding. Even the rogue mercenaries and pirates of the galaxy felt the impact of this collaboration, as their usual targets were swept up in the galactic shift toward countering the Tyranid menace. The coming of the Hive Fleets marked not only a new kind of warfare, but a fundamental change in how every faction in the galaxy viewed its own survival. In the face of the Tyranid threat, the political borders and long-held hostilities that had defined galactic civilization seemed to fade, replaced by a desperate unity forged under the shadow of annihilation. The Tyranids had unwittingly unified a galaxy too fractured to stand against them alone, spurring a coordinated effort to halt their advance. As the galaxy braced itself for the continued onslaught of the Tyranids, it was clear that the ancient rivalries and doctrines that once divided its inhabitants would need to be set aside for the sake of the galaxy's continued existence. This unprecedented shift in ideology and strategy marked the end of an era in the galaxy, as the Imperium and its reluctant allies prepared to confront the most relentless, unfeeling, and ultimately unknowable enemy they had ever faced. The rise of the Tyranids was a reckoning that forced all to reconsider their place within the cosmos, a cosmos that could, in a moment, be devoured by the hunger that lay within the Hive. As the first Tyranid Hive Fleets breached the borders of the galaxy, the seemingly unstoppable wave of bioengineered creatures brought with it a whirlwind of battles. Each encounter with the Tyranids was a crucible, a terrifying test for the defenders who sought to repel them. Every planet in the path of a Hive Fleet became a battlefield, each city and forest a temporary fortress for those desperate to delay the inevitable. In these hellish struggles, human forces were forced to adapt, to find new ways to fight against an enemy that evolved faster than any army could train or strategize. The initial stages of a Tyranid invasion began subtly, often marked by strange phenomena that defied explanation. The first sign was usually the arrival of a shadow in the warp, a psychic smothering that cut planets off from interstellar communications, blinding both astropaths and conventional scanners. This ominous silence spread like a creeping fog, leaving isolated worlds defenseless and vulnerable. The absence of messages from neighboring systems or sector commands sowed fear and confusion among planetary governors and military leaders, even as they struggled to understand the nature of their impending doom. Once this shadow had settled over a region, the true invasion began. Tyranid spores, thousands if not millions of them, rained down from the upper atmosphere, darkening the skies and releasing an alien biological cocktail that infected the very soil. Forests withered, rivers turned toxic, and the planet's environment shifted under a hostile transformation. Life-supporting ecosystems were drained and corrupted, becoming lethal to any non-Tyranid organisms. In these opening stages, few defenders truly understood what was happening. They could only watch as their world transformed around them, the land itself rebelling against its former inhabitants. With the planet sufficiently infected, Tyranid ground forces arrived in waves. First came the vanguard organisms, small and agile bioforms like the Genestealers and Lictors. Genestealers were infamous for their stealth and predatory prowess, slipping into settlements and hiding among the population until the main invasion force arrived. Lictors, camouflaged to blend into any environment, stalked the forests and urban ruins, tracking potential threats and marking them for future attacks. These creatures were not yet focused on open combat, but rather on weakening defenses, sowing discord, and gathering intelligence for the Hive Fleet that was soon to descend. The next stage unfolded with terrifying swiftness. As the main Tyranid forces landed, they did so with calculated precision, dividing and overwhelming defenders in multiple locations simultaneously. The swarm had no need for a centralized command structure. Instead, each bioform functioned with instinctive unity, coordinating attacks with an efficiency that baffled defenders. Masses of hormagaunts and termagants, fast-moving and deadly in close quarters, flooded defensive lines, absorbing bullets and last fire with their sheer numbers. Behind them, larger creatures like carnifexes and tyrannofexes smashed through barricades, tearing apart armor and artillery positions with unyielding strength. Every skirmish, every fortified line was merely a delay, as the Tyranids' true power lay in their numbers and their adaptability. The longer the battle raged, the more the Hive Fleet learned, adjusting its bioforms to exploit weaknesses in the defenders' strategies. Ammunition stores dwindled, defenses crumbled, and even the most valiant efforts became fleeting barriers to the inevitable. The defenders, facing an enemy that could adapt within hours, were forced into a vicious cycle of retreat and reformation, fighting a war of attrition against an enemy that never tired, never feared, and never hesitated. In rare cases, Imperial forces managed to halt the Tyranid advance temporarily. Entrenched positions on worlds like Macragge saw Space Marines and the Astra Militarum hold the line against the swarm, repelling wave after wave of Tyranid organisms with an almost suicidal determination. But each victory came at a great cost, as the Tyranids' presence left lingering scars on the planets they attacked. As if the bloodshed and environmental devastation weren't enough, the Hive Fleets carried away genetic material from every species they encountered, refining their bioforms with each encounter. Tyranid bioforms adapted to their opposition, growing deadlier with each defeat. Flamers that had once scoured waves of gaunts found limited effectiveness as Tyranid armor adapted to resist thermal attacks. Heavy weapons that tore through chitinous shells encountered new bioweapons capable of neutralizing their effects. Defenders who survived multiple battles saw this adaptation firsthand, witnessing the terrifying growth of Tyranid bioforms. Veteran soldiers and battle-worn Space Marines described the horror of facing familiar creatures altered into more lethal forms, their strength amplified, their speed enhanced. Every clash with the Tyranids felt like a preview of a deadlier one to come, with the creatures refining themselves as if in response to the galaxy's resistance. In the chaos of the battles, the Tyranids deployed their synapse creatures, bioforms with psychic control over the swarm that allowed them to direct their lesser kin with precision. These synapse leaders turned the Tyranid forces from a mindless swarm into a coordinated army, enabling advanced tactics like encirclements and feints that stretched defenders to their limits. Tyranid warriors, tall and deadly with scything limbs and flesh borers, led lesser organisms into battle. The Hive tyrants, towering and imposing, exerted their will over entire portions of the battlefield, making them key targets for Imperial forces. But even as defenders focused fire on these commanders, the Hive Fleet evolved and adapted new synapse bioforms to replace those lost, never allowing a single weak point to halt its advance for long. Despite their unity, Tyranid invasions were never simple assaults, but multi-stage processes that exploited both biological warfare and brute force. As a Hive Fleet consumed a planet's biomass, it would begin to redeploy its forces in new forms, evolving based on the genetic material it harvested. Tyranid organisms that fell in battle became the foundation of new creatures, each one a refinement of the ones before. Biomass would be reabsorbed by larger Tyranid entities, processed, and returned to the battlefield as fresh and deadlier versions of those that had fallen. This life cycle allowed the Tyranids to wage continuous campaigns without pause or supply lines, adapting to resistance in real time. The ultimate fate of worlds in the path of a Tyranid Hive Fleet was one of complete and utter devastation. Once the Tyranids had overwhelmed all resistance, their remaining bioforms would methodically strip the planet of all life. The swarm devoured every plant, animal, and microorganism, breaking down all organic material and consuming it in vast digestion pools. Entire forests vanished, oceans were drained, and cities were reduced to rubble and dust. The planet's atmosphere itself was siphoned off, its elements extracted and repurposed until only a barren, dead rock remained. The Tyranid fleet then retracted its forces, moving on to new worlds, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. The Imperium faced unimaginable losses with each world devoured. Beyond the immediate death and destruction, the Hive Fleet stripped the Imperium of critical resources, habitable planets, agricultural worlds, and strategic outposts. Entire sectors were weakened, their supply lines disrupted, and their defense networks shattered. The loss of a world to the Tyranids was not merely a military defeat, but an irreversible blow to the Imperium's lifeblood. For every planet that fell, countless lives and resources were sacrificed in the desperate attempt to prevent the Hive Fleet from advancing any further. Every victory came with the stark knowledge that another Tyranid fleet could emerge from the void at any moment, bearing down on another sector. The tragic irony was that in each Tyranid attack, the defenders unwittingly contributed to the Hive Fleet's evolution. Every new tactic, every weapon used, became genetic knowledge absorbed by the Hive mind, feeding its perpetual refinement. The very resistance that Imperial forces put forth was recycled into the Tyranid swarms, which emerged from each battle more lethal, more efficient, and better suited to counter future resistance. The Imperium's finest soldiers found themselves facing not only a monstrous enemy, but one that grew stronger with every confrontation, an enemy that seemed to learn faster than humanity could adapt. To Imperial strategists, it became clear that confronting a Hive Fleet was not simply a battle to win or lose, but an apocalyptic gamble. Each battle against the Tyranids had to be won decisively, for any prolonged engagement risked giving the hive mind more insight into Imperial strategies, weaponry, and tactics. The urgency of this realization set the tone for all subsequent encounters with the Tyranids, driving the Imperium's defenders to seek new approaches and innovative methods of warfare. They understood that, in the face of the Tyranids, every moment counted. Every skirmish had stakes beyond immediate survival, for the knowledge that the Tyranids would take from it would be wielded against them in the battles yet to come. In the maelstrom of war against the Tyranids, certain moments stand out as critical turning points, instances when decisions, tactics, or strokes of fate drastically altered the course of battle, and with it, the fate of entire worlds. Amid these intense confrontations, Imperial commanders and the forces under their command faced their darkest hours. These pivotal events often defined the resilience or failure of planetary defenses, the collapse of hive fleets, or the spark of strategies that would reshape humanity's resistance against the Tyranids. One such turning point emerged in the desolate battle for the planet Kael'thara Prime, a verdant agri-world on the edge of the Ultima Segmentum. For centuries, Kael'thara Prime had served as a vital breadbasket for dozens of nearby star systems, its rich fields providing food to sustain billions of Imperial citizens. When reports began of strange atmospheric disturbances and the unexplained disappearance of outlying settlements, planetary defenses were initially slow to respond. It was only when Vox communications fell silent across entire provinces that the true horror was revealed. A splinter from a Tyranid Hive Fleet had infiltrated the system and was now descending upon the planet. Imperial forces scrambled to respond, with detachments of the Astra Militarum bolstered by local defense forces and a small contingent of the Adeptus Astartes arriving to reinforce Kael'thara Prime's beleaguered defenders. The leadership on the planet, under the command of Lord Commander Thelanos, faced a dire situation. With limited resources and a civilian population to protect, Thelanos was forced into a corner, knowing that a direct battle against the swarm would mean total annihilation. His decision was to abandon large stretches of farmland to focus on fortifying the world's central urban centers, gambling on the chance that the swarm could be delayed long enough for reinforcements to arrive. The battle that unfolded was a brutal, grinding engagement as Tyranid bioforms poured onto the planet in ever-increasing numbers. The defenders fought tooth and nail, rallying around Thalanos' command post in the fortified city of Narnoth. The Tyranids adapted with each passing day, their bioforms growing stronger and more relentless, threatening to shatter the defenders' final lines. The city's defenders were stretched to their limits, and Thalanos realized that even his desperate gamble might not be enough to save the planet. At this moment, fate intervened in an unexpected way. Among the defenders was a regiment from the Death Corps of Krieg, a legendary unit known for their resilience and willingness to sacrifice everything in service to the Imperium. Their commander, Colonel Voss, approached Thalanos with a radical proposal. The Death Corps would create a series of controlled explosions beneath the city, effectively collapsing parts of the defensive perimeter to create a deadly kill zone filled with rubble and traps. Thalanos, aware of the enormous risks involved, gave his reluctant approval, knowing that it was their only chance. As the Tyranids surged forward, the Krieg forces detonated their charges, creating a nightmarish maze of rubble and trenches in which the Tyranids found themselves trapped. The narrow passages forced the swarms into tight bottlenecks where the defenders could concentrate their firepower. The Death Corps fought with unmatched ferocity, filling the broken landscape with toxic gas and incendiary rounds that cut down the Tyranids by the thousands. The tactics slowed the Tyranid advance significantly, buying the defenders crucial time as they waited for Imperial reinforcements. Despite overwhelming odds, the defenders held out for several more days, ultimately forcing the Tyranids to redirect their forces, sparing Kalthara Prime from complete devastation. This victory would become known as the Siege of Narnoth, a rare moment when humanity outlasted the swarm through pure determination and sacrificial tactics. But not all turning points in the Tyranid conflict would be victories. On the Forge world of Balstus, a crucial setback took place, one that would have lasting consequences on the Imperium's efforts to counter the Tyranid menace. Balstus was a key supplier of armored vehicles and weaponry, its forges producing Baneblades, Leman Russ tanks, and the specialized munitions necessary for anti-Tyranid warfare. When Hive Fleet Charybdis breached the system's perimeter, the local Mechanicus forces prepared their Skitari legions and activated the forge's automated defenses. The defense was led by Magos Dravik, a tech priest with a reputation for unwavering devotion to logic and machine efficiency. Dravik had spent years studying previous Tyranid encounters, and his defensive plans relied heavily on calculated ambushes and kill zones pre-designed to maximize the killing potential of the Forge's defenses. However, what he had not anticipated was the sudden adaptation of the Tyranid swarm. As Charybdis's organisms launched their assault, Dravik's traps and ambushes initially held them back, destroying thousands in the opening hours. But in the heat of battle, the Hive Fleet displayed an alarming capacity to reconfigure its attack patterns, shifting bioforms and deploying specialized creatures that disabled many of the Mechanicus' most critical assets. The critical failure of Dravik's defense strategy occurred when Charybdis deployed a series of synapse-controlled swarms that emitted a powerful electrostatic pulse, effectively crippling the Forge's automated defenses and rendering entire portions of the Skitari ranks inoperative. Without their technological advantage, the defenders were overwhelmed, the Tyranids quickly overrunning the factory floors and devouring the Mechanicus personnel stationed there. Dravik himself was slain, and Balstus fell, its precious resources and technology lost to the Hive Fleet. The loss of Balstus was a strategic disaster, as it left the surrounding sectors vulnerable and deprived the Imperium of a crucial supplier of weaponry. However, the galaxy's fight against the Tyranids was not without moments of innovation and courage. On the ice world of Egeron V, where temperatures fell to lethal lows and the landscape was barren and treacherous, the Tyranids faced conditions hostile to even their adaptive biology. Aegeron Phase defenders, a mix of Valhallan ice warriors and local militia, realized they could use the harsh climate to their advantage. Led by Captain Valenkov, the defenders established small mobile units that could lure Tyranid organisms onto the frozen lakes and snow-covered plains, areas where the ice was thin and the ground unstable. Valenkov's forces would strike the Tyranids with heavy weaponry from a distance, drawing the bioforms into pursuit across hazardous ice fields. As Tyranid masses closed in, the defenders would trigger explosive charges placed in the ice, creating fractures and sinkholes that swallowed entire clusters of Tyranids. This unorthodox strategy wreaked havoc on the swarm, as hundreds of Tyranid bioforms were rendered helpless, frozen, or drowned in the freezing waters. The victory on Aegeron V became a testament to the ingenuity of the Imperium, showing that even in the darkest of circumstances, there were methods to confront the swarm. The battle earned Valenkov recognition across the segmentum, as his tactics were adapted for other ice worlds facing the Tyranid threat. Despite these victories, each turning point served to underscore the immense challenge the Tyranids posed. For every hard-won battle, there were countless losses, entire planets left as lifeless husks in the wake of the swarm. And even as the Imperium achieved successes like the Siege of Narnoth and the Aegeron Fief trap, the Tyranids continued to adapt, each confrontation adding new genetic knowledge to the hive mind. It was a sobering reality that hung over every victory, a reminder that the Tyranid swarm grew stronger with every setback they suffered. Perhaps the most haunting realization for Imperial strategists was that, even when they managed to stall or halt a hive fleet's advance, it was only a temporary respite. Each hive fleet operated autonomously, but remained part of the larger Tyranid organism. When a fleet like Charybdis or Behemoth suffered defeat, the knowledge of that loss was absorbed and processed by the hive mind, ensuring that subsequent fleets would not repeat the same mistakes. Every victory, therefore, came with the grim understanding that the next battle would be harder. The tactics that had succeeded before likely rendered obsolete by the next encounter. Thus, each turning point in the war with the Tyranids served not only as a testament to humanity's resilience, but as a forewarning of the escalating challenges to come. Imperial forces and their allies found themselves locked in a war of innovation and adaptation, one in which every new tactic was a potential weapon and every battle a lesson for the swarms. In the shadow of such a relentless enemy, even victories carried the heavy weight of impending conflict, with every soldier and strategist painfully aware that the fight was far from over. The aftermath of battles against the Tyranid Hive Fleets left a scar on the galaxy that ran deeper than most other conflicts. When a world faced the full wrath of the Tyranids, it was rarely the same again. Those that survived their encounters with the Hive Fleets were left transformed, often irreparably, with the scars of war forever marking both the land and its people. On some planets, entire ecosystems collapsed, biodiversity was irreversibly altered, and once thriving habitats became desolate landscapes devoid of life. The cost was staggering, not only in human lives, but in the loss of vital worlds that the Imperium could hardly afford to lose. For the Imperium, each planet devoured or devastated by the Tyranids represented a strategic loss that rippled far beyond its own sector. Every agricultural world consumed left nearby planets without food supplies, forcing Imperial governors to seek emergency measures to avoid famine. Industrial worlds that were once bastions of production found their forges silent, and the resulting shortages in weapons and munitions weakened entire military fronts. The sprawling logistics network of the Imperium, already stretched to the breaking point by unending war, became strained to a near breaking point in regions hard hit by Tyranid incursions. Beyond material losses, the psychological impact of these attacks was profound. Survivors of Tyranid invasions often struggled with traumatic scars from witnessing the horrors firsthand. Many were left haunted by the sight of their homes transformed into battlefields, their friends and families lost to the relentless swarm. These civilians and soldiers alike were deeply changed, their faith in the Imperium's ability to protect them shaken. In the aftermath, many developed a bleak resignation, knowing that even if they managed to survive one Tyranid invasion, another Hive Fleet might someday return. This pervasive fear took root in the collective consciousness of entire star systems, fostering an atmosphere of dread that Imperial authorities struggled to dispel. In response to these psychological wounds, the ecclesiarchy launched intensive efforts to restore faith and morale among the populace. Priests and preachers were dispatched to the most heavily affected planets, delivering sermons that framed the conflict against the Tyranids as a sacred battle ordained by the Emperor himself. On pulpits and in public squares, they spoke of the Emperor's strength, urging citizens to see their suffering as a test of faith. These campaigns provided a sense of purpose to the grieving masses, portraying the struggle as an act of devotion rather than despair. But even the most fervent preaching could only go so far. Many still found it difficult to reconcile their faith with the monstrous, incomprehensible force that had nearly obliterated their worlds. For some, the Emperor's silence in the face of the Tyranids felt like a condemnation, a reminder of their isolation in an unforgiving galaxy. However, the psychological toll was not only limited to civilians. Among the ranks of the Astra Militarum, Space Marines, and even Inquisitors, the battles with the Tyranids left indelible marks. Veteran soldiers who had faced the swarms multiple times developed a grim understanding of the enemy, viewing each engagement as another step in a never-ending war that demanded unimaginable sacrifice. For the Space Marines, famed for their resolve, the Tyranid threat tested the very limits of their legendary stoicism. Some veterans, after years of facing the relentless swarms, developed a haunted look, their minds burdened by the knowledge that the Tyranids grew stronger with each encounter. These warriors carried the scars of battle not just on their armor, but in their very souls, forever changed by the horrors they had witnessed. Amidst the grimness of these psychological and material costs, there were those who sought to turn adversity into an opportunity to adapt. The Adeptus Mechanicus, ever eager to understand and harness new knowledge, began studying the remnants of Tyranid organisms left behind after battles. Inquisitors sanctioned research teams to collect specimens for study, though many approached the task with great caution, understanding the risks involved. These studies proved dangerous, with researchers occasionally falling victim to bioforms that retained lethal instincts even in death. But the Mechanicus persisted, driven by the hope of unlocking insights into the Tyranids' biology, and perhaps even discovering methods to disrupt their genetic processes. One notable result of these studies was the development of new bioweapons tailored specifically for use against Tyranid organisms. Scientists engineered viral agents designed to attack Tyranid cellular structures, seeking to weaken or destroy the creatures before they could adapt. These bioweapons, known as nihilist strains, were crafted to remain dormant in environments until activated by the presence of Tyranid pheromones. When released, the strains wreaked havoc on lesser Tyranid bioforms, disrupting their cellular functions and causing rapid decay. These tools were a breakthrough, and they became invaluable on certain battlefronts, where they bought defenders precious time before the Tyranids could evolve countermeasures. Yet, even the most advanced bioweapons only delayed the inevitable. The Hive Fleets absorbed and analyzed any new threat they faced, adapting swiftly to counter these measures. The nihilist strains, once devastating, eventually lost their effectiveness as the Tyranids developed resistance to the viral agents. This frustrating cycle of adaptation reinforced the chilling realization that the Tyranids could never truly be outsmarted in a lasting way. Each countermeasure, no matter how clever, provided only temporary relief before the Hive Fleets developed immunity. The war against the Tyranids was one of endless escalation, where every new weapon became another tool for the Hive mind to learn and overcome. The Inquisition also undertook extreme measures in the aftermath of Tyranid invasions. Fearful of genetic contamination and the spread of bioorganic threats, Inquisitors implemented stringent purification protocols on worlds that had been exposed to Tyranid organisms. In some cases, entire populations were purged if even a trace of Tyranid influence was detected. The Inquisition's actions were brutal, but in their minds, necessary to protect humanity from potential genetic corruption. Colonists were forced to undergo harsh screenings, and entire cities were quarantined or destroyed if contamination was suspected. The Inquisition's policies were seen by many as overly draconian, yet they argued that nothing could be left to chance where the Tyranids were involved. For every world that narrowly escaped annihilation, there was an overwhelming sense of gratitude for survival, mingled with sorrow for the irreversible losses they endured. On some planets, generations passed before stability returned, as rebuilding efforts struggled to keep up with the scars left by the Tyranid swarms. Entire populations lived in fear, constantly wary of any sign that the shadows of the Hive Fleets might return. Families shared tales of past battles, teaching their children the sounds of chittering alien voices and the sight of darkened skies filled with spores. This collective trauma, inherited across generations, became part of their identities, a constant reminder of the near-catastrophic losses they had endured. And yet, even as the people of the Imperium struggled with the aftermath, there were those who clung to hope. On planets touched by the Tyranids, small communities of survivors formed tight bonds, united by their shared ordeal. These survivors displayed a tenacity and resolve that defied the crushing despair of the galaxy. Many became steadfast believers in the Emperor's protection, devoting their lives to rebuilding and fortifying their homes in preparation for future threats. They passed down their stories and their lessons, teaching future generations to remain vigilant, resilient, and unyielding in the face of horror. For some, the aftermath of the Tyranid attacks even inspired a resurgence of innovation and creativity. Artists and writers began to depict the struggle against the Tyranids in bold, haunting works that captured the bravery, sacrifice, and resilience of humanity. These expressions of defiance served as a testament to the spirit of those who had fought and survived. Murals, poems, and songs spread across the Imperium, transforming the memory of those lost into symbols of courage. Through these creative works, the stories of survival and resistance reached countless others, offering a message of strength and solidarity in a galaxy that often seemed void of hope. Despite the heavy toll, the aftermath of the Tyranid invasions also provided opportunities for the Imperium to learn and grow. As the survivors rebuilt their worlds, they implemented new fortifications, adaptive defenses, and rapid response systems. By integrating the lessons learned from their encounters with the Tyranids, many worlds became better prepared to withstand future incursions. Entire planets turned their focus to defensive preparations, constructing fortified walls, expanding planetary defenses, and training their populations to respond swiftly to any threat. These efforts transformed planets into near fortresses, no longer the soft targets they once were, and gave the Imperium a glimmer of hope that perhaps one day they might be able to turn back the Tyranid tide for good. Yet for all the resilience, adaptation, and ingenuity shown, the shadow of the Tyranids lingered. In the minds of those who had faced the swarms, there was an unshakable understanding that the Hive Fleets represented something beyond mere warfare. They were a force of nature, an unending appetite that could never truly be defeated, only delayed. As new generations were born into a galaxy that had endured the Tyranids' horrors, they inherited both the lessons and the lingering fear that, somewhere beyond the stars, the swarms awaited, growing, learning, and evolving, preparing for the day when they would return to devour all that humanity had fought to preserve. The battles with the Tyranid Hive Fleets reshaped warfare, pushing the boundaries of technology and tactics in ways previously unimaginable. Facing an opponent that was both ceaseless and highly adaptable, Imperial forces and their allies developed new methods and weapons to counter the Tyranids' unique abilities. Traditional strategies proved insufficient, and the conflict became a crucible for innovation, leading to the creation of some of the most advanced technologies and daring tactics in the galaxy. One of the most pivotal technological advancements came in the form of the biophage munitions, a weapon specially engineered to disrupt the Tyranid organisms on a cellular level. Developed through a combination of Mechanicus bioengineering and forbidden xenos technology, these munitions carried an agent that destabilized Tyranid genetic material. When deployed on the battlefield, the biophage rounds would disintegrate parts of the Tyranid bioforms, rendering them incapable of sustaining the critical structures that allowed their bodies to function. While effective, these munitions require delicate handling and strict regulations, as even the slightest error in their production could lead to disastrous failures or mutations in the field. Alongside biophage munitions, the Mechanicus developed the neurodisruptor array, a series of psychically attuned devices designed to sever the synaptic connection between the Tyranid hive mind and its lesser bioforms. These arrays emitted frequencies that disoriented Tyranid creatures, throwing them into disarray as their connection to the hive mind wavered. Though powerful, these devices were notoriously difficult to control and often overloaded in prolonged engagements. Despite these drawbacks, the neurodisruptor arrays proved invaluable in certain battles, where moments of disorientation among Tyranid forces allowed defenders to regroup or launch counteroffensives. However, the Tyranids rapidly adapted, evolving bioforms with resistance to the disruptor's effects, and thus the technology required constant upgrades. In response to the escalating capabilities of the Tyranids, the Imperium also bolstered its defensive infrastructure on a planetary scale. Fortress cities were redesigned with enhanced shield generators, specialized in repelling bioorganic matter, and with walls capable of absorbing the acidic compounds found in Tyranid weaponry. These cities became fortified bastions, optimized for resisting Tyranid siege tactics. Defense planners created complex trench systems and labyrinthine underground shelters to give civilians and non-combat personnel a chance to survive when open engagement became impossible. Orbital defenses also received an overhaul, with stations and satellites armed with specialized incendiary and acid-neutralizing weaponry. Many planetary governors coordinated with the Adeptus Mechanicus to install weaponized solar mirrors, allowing defenders to scorch vast swaths of land from orbit, targeting Tyranid hives as they emerged on the planet's surface. To address the Tyranids' relentless swarm tactics, the Astra Militarum and Imperial Guard developed a series of counter-swarm strategies designed to contain and neutralize massed enemy forces. A key tactic, known as the Scorched Ground Doctrine, involved sacrificing regions of the planet deemed indefensible by lacing them with incendiary devices, chemical agents, and explosive mines. Once activated, these areas became death zones, with fires and toxic gases designed to dissuade Tyranid advancements or cause extensive attrition within their ranks. The Scorched Ground Doctrine was brutal and led to significant collateral damage, but it served as a last resort measure in planetary defense. This doctrine allowed Imperial forces to control the battlefield's geography, effectively forcing the Tyranids into predictable approaches where they could be targeted with concentrated artillery and orbital strikes. The forces of the Death Watch, an elite group of space marines dedicated to combating xenos threats, brought their own array of advanced technology and weaponry specifically designed for Tyranid encounters. Each Death Watch unit deployed to counter Tyranid invasions was equipped with the Hellfire round, a specialized bullet laced with potent toxins and microacids designed to dissolve Tyranid carapaces and tissues upon impact. These Hellfire rounds were instrumental in creating breaches in Tyranid lines, allowing the Death Watch to target key bioforms such as synapse creatures. In addition, Death Watch librarians honed psychic powers that could isolate and disorient Tyranid forces, tearing apart lesser bioforms with concentrated blasts of psychic energy. Their specialized weaponry and unique tactics made them a force to be reckoned with, even against the overwhelming numbers of the Tyranid swarms. The Adeptus Mechanicus further developed autonomous combat technologies, deploying waves of combat drones and servitors designed specifically to withstand the Tyranids' aggressive advances. Known as the Castellan Mechanized Infantry, these constructs were armed with flamethrowers, plasma weapons, and acid-resistant plating, capable of moving autonomously within Tyranid-infested zones to deliver calculated strikes. These mechanized units lacked the fear or hesitation of organic soldiers, charging fearlessly into battle against the swarms. Equipped with adaptive targeting systems, they could lock onto and neutralize key Tyranid bioforms, particularly in environments where human soldiers would be overwhelmed. However, the construction of Castellan units was costly, and their deployment was limited to high-priority zones where their impact could shift the outcome of major engagements. Facing the threat of airborne Tyranid swarms, the Imperial Navy introduced several key advancements in void combat tactics and aerial defenses. The Flame Tempest tactic, developed to counter Tyranid organisms in space, utilized ships equipped with modified lance batteries capable of dispersing incendiary plasma across wide areas. These flame tempests created burning zones in space, incinerating swarms of Tyranid bioships that attempted to breach planetary atmospheres. These tactics proved highly effective in controlling the approach paths of Tyranid fleets, creating temporary perimeters around planets at risk. Alongside the flame tempests, rapid response fighter squadrons deployed specialized missiles that released clusters of explosive fragments designed to tear through the clustered bioships, further dispersing and isolating them from one another. By isolating segments of the swarm, the Navy could disrupt the cohesion that Tyranid fleets depended upon. At the forefront of ground-based innovations was the deployment of biomancer squads, specialist units trained in the manipulation of biological matter. Drawing from knowledge traditionally guarded by the Adeptus Mechanicus and xenobiologists, biomancers were able to field experimental biological agents to disarm Tyranid bioforms in real time. Equipped with toxic spores and flesh-dissolving agents, these squads operated behind the main lines, focusing on disabling or mutating Tyranid bioforms to weaken the swarms. Though these methods were controversial and hazardous, especially given the ethical concerns over handling xenos biology, the biomancer squads proved their worth on numerous war fronts, offering a level of biowarfare capable of slowing even the fastest adapting Tyranid forces. Despite all these technological advancements, Imperial strategists recognized the vital importance of adapting tactical philosophies, understanding that the sheer flexibility of the Tyranids demanded a shift from rigid formations to dynamic, flexible combat doctrines. To better confront the ever-changing Tyranid menace, the Astra Militarum established rapid response cohorts within its ranks. These elite units were trained to deploy quickly to active combat zones, with pre-adapted equipment to counter specific bioforms identified through reconnaissance. Members of these cohorts became highly skilled in hit-and-run tactics, striking critical Tyranid targets before redeploying to new positions. This flexibility allowed them to maintain a tactical edge over the Tyranids, forcing the swarm to constantly adjust to the shifting locations of the cohorts. Finally, in collaboration with the Ordo Xenos, the Imperium developed the Null Zone Protocol, a last resort measure designed to defend against large-scale Tyranid invasions. The Null Zone Protocol involved creating areas saturated with anti-psychic fields, where the connection between the Tyranid organisms and the hive mind could be severed or dampened. By deploying these zones strategically around critical objectives, Imperial forces could isolate Tyranid bioforms from their command structure, turning the swarms into mindless beasts. However, creating and maintaining these null zones required rare anti-psychic materials and enormous energy resources, limiting their use to the most critical defenses. When activated, null zones could destabilize Tyranid attacks, granting Imperial defenders precious moments to eliminate vulnerable bioforms before they could regroup. The constant drive for new technologies and tactics revealed the Imperium's understanding that the war with the Tyranids was not merely a test of strength, but an intellectual battle of adaptation and innovation. The Imperium's survival depended on its ability to continuously develop technologies capable of countering the Tyranids' rapid evolution. Each new weapon or strategy was a temporary advantage, a fleeting edge in a battle that demanded constant vigilance and reinvention. Every technological breakthrough had to be matched with a commitment to refine and improve, as even the most successful tactics eventually lost their effectiveness against the Tyranids' relentless adaptability. In the end, the arsenal of weapons and tactical innovations built to counter the Tyranids served as a reflection of the Imperium's enduring resilience. Every piece of machinery, every specialized squad, and every defensive doctrine was forged from a place of desperation and survival, yet they became symbols of hope amidst the darkness. For even as the galaxy faced one of its greatest existential threats, humanity's ingenuity and determination to adapt offered a small yet persistent glimmer of hope in the endless struggle to preserve its place in a hostile universe.